G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Welcome back to the Financial Bloke's Wealth and Wisdom Podcast. Today I'm back being interviewed and this time it's Sam Fryer, the host of A Place to Call Home podcast. Sam reached out to me as he wanted to know more about starting your first business. So maybe you're buying a few head of livestock. Maybe you're bootstrapping a business from scratch. You might be buying a going concern business that's already running, or maybe just working for yourself is something you've aspired to. And today we're going to discuss some of the key things you need to know about if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur. A kind of business 101 session. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Sam.
G'day everyone, and welcome to A Place to Call Home podcast. I'm your host Sam Fryer, and I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. On today's episode, we chat to the financial bloke, Ben Law. Now, this episode is great for anyone looking to start out in business. Doesn't matter where you're looking in agriculture or you're a chippy kicking off on your own. This is a great episode for you. We cover a range of different topics, and really, Ben gives a bit of a 101 onto getting started with business and things you should be aware of and things you should take note of. So, if you're kicking off on a business on your own, be sure to tune into this episode and even share it with some friends because there's some great stuff in here. I must say also a big thanks to Ben for giving up his time. He graciously shared it, and it was awesome to hear some of his experiences that he's done from starting two of his own businesses. So once again, I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do, be sure to share it with some friends and family. I'd greatly appreciate that. Cheers. One last thing before we jump into today's episode. I just want to do a big shout out for this episode's partners, the Common Ground Foundation. They're an amazing charity that does some special work for rural families. So be sure to check them out, and thank you very much. Cheers. Ben, thank you very much for jumping on board the Place to Call Home podcast. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, can you tell us a bit more about yourself? Where do you live? Throw in a few dad stats, and what do you do for a living?
Oh, excellent, Sam. Well, look, mate, great. Thanks for inviting me on. It's not very often that I get to be on the other side of the microphone, and when I do, it's a lot of fun. So, and I love what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's a massive demand out there, and I think there's a lot of what I'd call young people out there that are trying to get into their first place or into their first business. And just clarify, I'm 46, Sam. So anyone under 40 is a young person, just to be clear. So now, a little bit about myself. So as you probably put in the introduction, my name's Ben Law. I'm the Financial Bloke. I've got a podcast called The Financial Bloke's Wealth and Wisdom, and it's essentially targeted at the farming community. I grew up on a cattle property about an hour south of Tamworth down in New South Wales, where my parents are still on the property. And I currently live on the Sunshine Coast. So beautiful part of the world to live. And my background is, as I said, I grew up on the land, did a university degree, and then fell into financial advice and worked in financial advice for about 20 years. I did a stint in London working for a hedge fund, which was a whole lot of fun, and that's a whole different podcast in itself. But then I got back, started my own financial advice practice, and I essentially worked with successful farming families and also other business owners. So I spent a good part of my professional career doing that. In 2020, I had a heart scare in my early 40s, and I woke up one day and said, right, I've got to go do something different. So I sold my financial advice practice and retired, took a year off, and then got bored, said, what am I going to do now? I promised my wife I'd have a year off, and I did have the year. And then I started the podcast. And I have a coaching business for farming families, helping them align their families, grow their wealth, and protect the legacies. So it's about the whole intergenerational wealth transfer space. So people always say, what's that mean, Sam? Essentially, it means succession is part of that process. So it's like, how do we grow the family wealth? How do we protect it? And how do we transition to the next generation without losing it, avoiding the 3-generation curse?
Yeah.
So that's my, in a nutshell, I think, Sam. And the dad stats, I'm married. I have one daughter who's 7. I would have had a whole heap more, only she's a IVF baby. I did a lovely podcast on that recently, which made me very uncomfortable, but I did it anyhow. But yeah, so we have one. I have a beautiful daughter that's 7, which is great.
So she'd definitely be running the household. I've got 2 girls and 1 boy, and I think our littlest runs the house at the moment, as she definitely bosses us all around. Ben, growing up, like you mentioned that you did grow up in land, I just want to take you back a little bit, because what I want to get to is the precipice, I suppose, of this love of bush and agriculture. Like you said that you did go away and you have worked financial sector for a while, but then you came back to what you're doing with the financial bloke. What was it like growing up on the property? Were you always running around, and is this where the love of agriculture started for you?
Yeah, I loved the farm growing up. I spent all my spare time with my dad. We had a cattle property. I used to win all the most potential cattle breeder things at the local shows, and used to go to the Ekka and Brisbane with steers and bulls and things like that. So that was really my passion. But what happened, Sam, is my family fell foul of what I call the 3 generations curse, which is 2 to make it, one to essentially lose it. And not that my dad lost it, but what happened is at a very early age, I could see that there was my grandfather, my uncle, my dad, myself, my cousins, etc., all on the farm. And I could just see there wasn't, the space there for me to do what I wanted to do. And my mum used to always bang into me. She said, get a financial education and don't be like us. And so whilst I loved ag, I could see that, I needed to go make my own way in the world. And as a younger person, it was distressing, that I could see all my mates that were coming back to properties with their parents and stuff like that. But I made my peace with it, and I went off and did an ag economics degree, and then essentially served, what I'd say is operated in and served the ag industry in my own special way, and built a good career out of it. And it was only lucky I did a year in banking, and I hated that, Sam. That just didn't suit me. But then I fell into financial advice and found that I was, half decent at it. And farmers, graziers, they all needed really good quality financial advice. So whilst I couldn't be a grazier at that stage, I could at least be involved with heavily in the industry.
I think it's an interesting point though you touched on there, Ben, and definitely we all know that the first one make it, second one build it, third one loses it. And I think I heard the stat the other day at a school I went to, and they said that, it's only 13% of family farms actually successfully transition or something. So, which is incredibly low. And I think you're not alone. And I know personally it's very, I suppose, similar, except I'm still here. Luckily, I still live here, but I've had to go and work off farm to build something else to hopefully one day enable me to one day buy in or, become a full-time grazier. And it's amazing the amount of people out there that are in that same boat. And I suppose I'm trying to be a bit of a cheerleader for those people with the podcast as well, because it's not an easy journey to do that, to walk away from a family farm and try and have a career to hopefully one day achieve that. So I suppose moving forward, Ben, but what was that like when you initially got it going and stepping towards setting up the financial bloke?
Yeah, well, what happened was I fell into financial advice. And as I said, I found that I was half decent at it, and I built a really good business. And I think it would be about 5 or 6 years ago, Sam, that I started to get really frustrated with things. And it was like, as a financial advisor, I can only help about 50 families. That was as many as families that I could help. And I could see there was just so many families out there needed help, but I couldn't do it. And so I used to, one of my pet projects was, I was thinking, well, how can I actually help the rural community so that less people fall into what I call the 3-generation curse, or how do more people, create opportunities for themselves? And that's why I set up the Financial Bloke originally. It was just a column I used to write in the Queensland Country Life. I used to do videos and things like that, just trying to educate people. And I figured with the financial bloke, like the barefoot investor, he managed to influence the Australian community very heavily by having that persona, shall we say, and hence that's where the financial bloke came about. And then when I retired from the financial advice industry, I thought the financial bloke would die with me. I thought, well, that's the end of Ben Law, the financial advisor, and probably Ben Law, the financial bloke. And then, what happened was I started to talk to a lot of my old clients and people in the industry and saying, well, I can no longer give you financial advice, but what's missing? And I was figuring out there's this whole business, strategic planning, family coaching, that sort of stuff that was just missing. It was missing out there. And there was very few people actually tackling that problem. And just to add on to those stats that you said, Sam, there was some stats came out of America a few years ago, which I love to talk about. And they did a whole lot of research about this whole succession planning. And they called it wealth transfer. So it wasn't just farming. It was what they called families that wanted to transition a business or farming or some sort of wealth. And they were saying that 70% of wealth transfers fail. And within 2 generations, 90% of that wealth that's been built, so within the farm, is gone. That's the stats. So pretty much for me, I could see that there was these stats were terrible. And then I started looking into, well, how do we actually stop that? Like, how do you improve those stats? How do you actually take it from being one of the 70% to being one of the 30%, or instead of 90% of the wealth's gone, well, how do you be part of the 10%? And that's where I started looking at all the reasons that happen. And I think as a community, if we can actually attack those problems and solve those problems, then there's going to be more young farmers and graziers going back on the land and living that life. And it's interesting. Have we got time for me to just share a couple of stats around that?
Yeah, Sam? Go for it.
Yeah, okay.
This is the place to do it.
Yeah, it was interesting, mate. It came down to what were the reasons that this happened? And there was, I think it was something like 6,500 families were surveyed right throughout the world, and 3% of the reasons this happened was poor professional advice. So in other words, the accountant got it wrong, the financial advisor got it wrong, the lawyer got it wrong, and then when mum and dad died, there was a dust up. That was only 3%. It was something like 60% was due to a breakdown in trust and communication in a family. So in other words, we end up eventually with a dust up. People aren't on the same page. 25% was due to a lack of prepared heirs, so not preparing the next generation to take over, which was a really interesting one. So that's the next generation haven't been gone through the apprenticeship on how to manage that wealth or that farming asset. And the last was a lack of a strategic mission or a direction for the family. So in other words, we've got this family farming operation or this business. What's the ultimate goal here? How do we all get on the same page so that we're all rowing towards the same destination? And so I thought, well, that's all within a family's control. You can't control your professional advisors necessarily, but that's only 3% of the reason. So if you can tackle the lack of communication and trust, the not preparing the heirs to take over the next generation, and the family not having a mission, then we should be able to adjust those stats. And that's what the financial bloke became all about. Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
So what services do you offer, Ben? And what area do you cover? Do you cover most of Australia, or are you pretty well stuck down there, or where do you cover?
Oh, look, with the internet these days and video and all that sort of stuff, we sort of cover all over Australia. But essentially, we work with certain types of grazing families and farming families that are intergenerational. So they've got people coming back onto the land, family members involved, and they want to make sure they avoid that 3-generation curse. So how do we actually take on our business, get everyone aligned, and drive that business forward so mum and dad can retire and get off the farm and live the life they want to lead, and then the next generation can come through and actually take over responsibility or the custodial management and drive the business forward.
Yep. So Ben, the reason why I've got you on board, I've had a few people reach out to me, and really they wanted to focus on and questions around that getting started in business, whether it is like, the chippies or your builders or, Sparkies or even in agriculture. And they were kept coming up and they were hoping for someone to come on board and help them through this conversation. So hence why I reached out to yourself. So focusing around this getting started in business and a bit of a business introduction 101. For those starting out, what are some of the key things they should think of before they do start a new business venture?
Well, and look, I think that's a bloody good question because there's a lot to know. And what I did, Sam, luckily you gave me the questions in advance so I could mentally prepare a little bit so I don't look like a complete dum-dum. But I thought I'd tackle this a little bit regarding the things that I would have liked to have known when I started my couple of businesses. And this is my second business I've started now. So I think the first thing most people have got to ask, and you gave me the scenario that someone's, maybe working at home or working a job in town, and they've started their own business, and it sounds like a bit of a side gig to start with. Does that sound about right, Sam?
Yeah, definitely. I think the example that I gave you was a young couple in town, and he used to be working for builders, and now they're looking to branch off and set up his own building business. Yeah, while they're hopefully having that goal of one day buying a bit of dirt somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's how most businesses start, Sam, is they're either a side gig. So in other words, I'm doing it on the side, which is what I did with a financial bloke when I first started. It was just a love job, just to give back to the community. And then for others, it's they've been working in an occupation for a while. They're very skilled at it, and then they go out on their own and take the risk. And I think the first bit of advice I'd give most people who are going to go and start a business is to work out very, very clearly up front, why the bloody hell are you doing this? Now, the reason I say that's probably the most important part is being in business is tough. It's not all unicorns and fairies like my 7-year-old believes the world is. It's tough. You're going to have to learn to put on a whole lot of different hats. Let's say you're a builder. You can be the best bloody builder in the world, but you're the worst business owner. Only a portion of your time is going to be building houses or sheds, etc. A lot of it's going to be in learning the skills on how to run a business. So the first thing is work out why you're doing it. Because when you hit those roadblocks or you hit some tough times, you've got a really strong desire or a reason to do it. And I chatted with my wife about this last night, Sam. I went through and I said, well, what are some tips for you? Like, what would you say? Because she's been on the journey with me both times. And she said, Ben, I'd say, how much do you want it and what are you willing to pay? Because the business will extract its pound of flesh, and you got to work out, are you willing to pay the price? Now, owning your own business for me is incredibly rewarding. I would never be an employee again. I'm just not built for it these days, and I love it. But the stats are most will fail within the first 5 to 10 years. And so it will extract its pound of flesh. So you've got to make sure that you know what you're willing to do and go into it with eyes wide open. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. And especially one thing, I suppose, and lately I've been having this conversation with people, is that the working with a full-time job versus going off and creating your own business. So I don't know if you want to touch on some of the pros and cons of that. Like, I know what I do, but I'd like to hear your point of view of having that secure job or reaching out and going and creating your own business and going forward.
Yeah, well, I've done both. Obviously, I worked for probably half my career as an employee, and the rest as being self-employed. I think the number one thing is you got to work out: are you willing to take risk? It all falls on your shoulders. You get all the rewards, but you also get all the risks. So with it being an employee, life's a lot simpler. It's not It's not maybe better, but it's simpler. When you go to work, I used to when I was an employee, get up in the morning, I'd go to work, I'd start thinking about work on the drive in, and then on the way home, I'd be thinking about it. But once I was home, I'd forgotten about it. Whereas the business can become a little bit all encompassing. So you've got to be happy with that. But on the other side, if you grow a successful business, you will have far more freedom if you do it properly than someone who's an employee. And you've got to work out, are you built for that? Because some people aren't built for it, Sam. Some people, like I've got two sisters, one who's built to be an entrepreneur, business owner, the other one who's absolutely built to be an employee. And they both love what they do and they're both suited. So you've got to work that out. But I think number one first, next probably, Sam, is work out what your vision is of where you want to get to. Like a lot of people start a business and I'll say something like, what's the big picture here? What's the ultimate goal? And they usually shrug their shoulders and, I don't know. I'm like, well, you need to bloody find that out and you need to figure that out. And you need to figure that out early. So my advice is work out what the vision is, whether that be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, and write it the bloody hell down.
That's good advice, Ben. I think definitely one thing I want to ask about is what's some of those trigger points as you are stepping out and you have almost a hobby or a side hustle that starts growing into being a full-time business role. What are some of those steps between that transition that I suppose to be aware of for those people on that journey?
It is. Well, look, I think the first part is you've got what I call the bootstrapped or side hustle, which is what we talked about before, which is it's your part-time thing on the side you're doing, or it's something you're spending no money on and just keeping it really, really tiny. And I think that's the first phase. The next phase is basically the full-time commitment. And that's where you go, righto, I'm in, balls and all, let's go. That's what we want to basically work out. And then the next phase is what I call the who, not how phase. So that's the phase where you actually say, okay, I can't do everything and I need to start outsourcing. So you start outsourcing, you get employees, you might have a bookkeeper that does the bookkeeping, you get other people to help grow and expand the business. And the sooner you can get to there, the better you'll be, the more sustainable your business will be at that stage. But there's some other really important stuff that I think that I just wrote down here, Sam, too, mate, of what we need to get in place is that vision and work out, is this a business or a hobby or a passion?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in this whole, this is a hobby and I'm passionate about it, but it's not necessarily a business. And then I think the first phase, you need to actually be serious with yourself and run the numbers. And can I make it profitable? Can I actually turn this into a business? How much do I need? And unfortunately, what happens, Sam, is a lot of people don't know how to do that. So they look at me and they say, Ben, well, how do I do that? And I said, well, find someone else who's done it before you and have a good hard look at their business. Have they been able to replicate that? And if you've seen someone else do it, well, then you can model them. Not copy, model. So you can say, okay, well, they've made it work. If I'm a building and construction company, what does a successful building and construction company look like?
Around, like my podcast is called A Place to Call Home. So, we're focusing on this journey towards land ownership, and very much whether I've talked to a whole lot of different people, whether they do start off like go straight in, or they might have some cattle adjustment, they might be running full time with that. Or I've even talked to people that have like a business on the side and they've built into that land ownership, or even working full time and building into that land ownership. Like there's so many different ways to get there. And I think you touched on a key point there, trying to work out whether it's a hobby or a full-time actual occupation, because so many people, while they might like the idea of owning land and being a producer and stuff like that, it probably won't ever be for them to be a full-time. They might just want to end up having a bit of land somewhere that they can run a few cows, run a few horses or sheep or whatever they want to do, while also maintaining a full-time job or an occupation outside of the business. So I think it's essential for people when they do start on the journey is have a good hard look, like you said, about the vision and kind of where do they want to be at the very end, and what are they willing to do to get there, because it's no set thing set out. Life isn't a set journey. It's really experiencing it and trying to mold it to how you are and what would you like to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. But to add to that, Sam, is there's two things you need if you want to buy and grow assets. So if you want to buy land or you want to buy cattle or whatever, is you have to borrow money to do it. And to do that, you need to have equity. So that means you need to own some assets that the bank can take security. So if you go into the bank and say, look, I'd like to borrow $1 million to buy this block of land, the bank's going to say, well, what's your deposit? And you're like, so you want to get equity in something as soon as possible. So for some people, what they might do is say, well, look, I can't afford that farm right now, but what I'll do is I'll buy a small block, a little hobby block, and I'll get that and I'll clean it up and I'll build it and I'll pay off as much as I can, as quick as I can, so I can start to build equity to be able to use that equity to do something. And the second thing is cash flow. Banks won't lend you money if you don't have the cash flow to be able to pay off that debt. So finding ways to build your cash flow. So if you're running a cattle business, it's like, okay, well, you need to build your cattle numbers up to be able to get enough calves to sell each year to be able to service the debt. It's really important because the banks won't lend if you've got no equity, and they won't lend if you've got no cash flow. So you've got to find both. And I've seen people get tripped up over the years where they've built equity but no cash flow, and others that have built cash flow but no equity. And that's an awful difficult position to be in. And it's like in a lot of cases, you've just got to get on the rung somehow as soon as possible. Now, you might not buy a block of land. You might buy a commercial building and say, right, I'll buy that commercial building to put my building business in, and I'll pay that down as quick as I can. Or you might buy a house. I'll buy a house in town and just bust my guts to pay that off, or renovate it or clean it up so that it's worth more value.
Yep. Ben, following on from, I suppose, looking at the very start, what are some of the things that people miss or forget when they are starting out in business from a financial point of view?
Yep.
You just mentioned cash flow there, an asset, but are there any others?
Yeah. And look, I've got a list of them here, so I'll just quickly go down through them. First one is keep good records. Straight away, get yourself an accounting software, so something like Xero or MYOB. That's the first thing, and keep good records and learn how to do them. It's a skill you need to learn, whether you've got a cattle business or you've got a plumbing business or whatever it is. Learn that skill straight away. It's really, really important. Number two, get insurance. If something goes wrong, like public liability insurance, professional indemnity, those sorts of things. If someone, if you've got a building company and you leave a rake lying down on the ground and someone treads on it and falls over it and breaks their back, you're going to be sued. Make sure you've got insurances in place. And to do that, go see an insurance broker. And that could be even if you've got a small cattle business, because what happens if a cow gets out on the road, run over by a car, someone gets killed, you're to blame, they'll sue you, you lose everything. So insurance is really important. Go see an accountant. Now, in a lot of cases, people say, well, who do I go see? A good place to start is mum and dad's. So if mum and dad's got an accountant or a brother and sister or an auntie and uncle, find a half decent accountant and go and pay for a short amount of their time for them to sit down and talk you through what you might need around ABNs, companies, trusts, partnerships, those sorts of things. Like, get that up front and start to educate yourself. Don't be ignorant. You need to know this stuff. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to know, if that makes sense. The next one is provision for tax, Sam. You don't know how many people I've seen over the years have become busted assed and lost everything because they worked their guts out. They got all this income came in. They used it to pay off debt or buy or increase their cattle numbers. And then they don't do their tax return for 12 or 18 months. Then the accountant rings up and says, I've got a 50 grand tax bill. And they're like, W2EF, where the hell did that come from? And they spend the next 5 years trying to climb out of that hole. So from the start, make sure you provision for tax. If you don't bloody know how to do that, go to the accountant and say, hey, I'm starting this business. This is what I'm going to be earning. How much should I put away? Worst case scenario, if you can't get an answer there, is set up a separate bank account and put the GST in it so you never get caught up, because most things people sell have got GST on it. So put the GST in a separate account and potentially provision, say, 30% of every dollar you earn and put into that tax account again. And so that means that at the end of the time when you do your tax return, you're going to probably, for the first couple of years, have far more tax account money in the account than the tax you got to pay. But at least don't get caught into that, because I've seen way too many people get caught by that, Sam. The next one I had, mate, if you don't mind me rabbiting on too much, but the next one is get a quality network of people. That's really, really important. Start to surround yourself with other successful or driven people. You've got to get rid of the turkeys, the naysayers, the negative Nancy's. It's really important to surround yourself with great people. And there's the old quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you're surrounding yourself with dodos and negative Nancy's and people that aren't go-getters, on average, that's what you're going to turn out. It's infectious. Whereas if you surround yourself with 5 go-getters, for example, there's more likely that you're going to succeed. And that's the same for your advisors, the people you do business with. Make sure if you use an accountant, when you get up and running, use a bloody good quality accountant. If you're going to use a banker, use a bloody good banker and get up and running as quick as you can. And last but not least, I had on my notes there, Sam, was learn the business skills, like learn how to run a business. A lot of people make the mistake of they're good technicians. So they're good at grazing or breeding cattle or feeding cattle or turning over cattle or building houses or fixing plumbing. And they're really bloody good at that. But being a business owner, that's the technical skills. Being a business owner is far more than the technical skills that you've got as a technician. They're really important. So start to learn those business skills and think like a business owner. Really, really important. And I'll add one more in too, is have some fun. Yeah. Don't just be obsessed with the business. I'm a workaholic and I'm a pretty damn tenacious and focused sort of individual. And I can tell you, it can become obsessive. So you got to basically balance it out, have a life, have some fun, and blow off a little bit of steam every now and then.
It's good to hear you throw in that last point, Ben, because I can fully feel I'm pretty on the same boat too. Sometimes I think I kind of forget to stop and relax and spend time with the kids. And I think having children is probably the biggest one to make you stop, because they grow up so fast. And if you don't stop and enjoy that time, you're never going to get it back. So it's a good that you put that last point in. I really enjoyed that. That was good.
But here's the thing. And I've fallen into this case, Sam, is you run the risk of lying to yourself and everyone around you, in the sense that you say, I'm spending all the time in my business and I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for my kids. There's an element of truth to that, but as a reformed workaholic, it's a lie. A lot of the times we're doing it for ourselves. So we need to make sure we be honest with ourselves. I mean, my wife said to me when our business was at its peak, she said, it feels like the business gets the best of you all the time. And quite often we get the worst.
Yep.
So just remembering that, the business won't marry you. The business won't look after you. Your wife and children will, or husband and children will, shall I say.
That one there is definitely hit me, that one. And I think it'll definitely hit a fair few people, because it's not easy, this journey that we're on towards land ownership. And you've got to make some sacrifices. It's just really working out which sacrifices are worth it and which ones aren't in the end. Ben, like following on from all those great points that you just made, I don't know whether this question's worthwhile, but I think I should ask it anyway. But what should the next generation of landowners be doing now to prepare themselves for the future? What skills and stuff should they be doing right now?
Well, I call them beyond the farm skills. That's what they need to be learning. It's starting to educate themselves, and that's around like we're all taught how to graze cattle or build houses or plant cotton crops, but we're not taught the business of farming. So as soon as you can, start to learn those business skills. Do the bookworks. Don't let someone else do the bookwork, or your wife do the bookwork, or your husband do the bookwork. Do the bookwork yourself so you can start to learn those skills. Have meetings with your accountants. Go see your bank manager. Learn as much as you can. That's really important. I think they get that quality network of people. It's really, really important to have those right people. That'll pay dividends down the track. And I literally had a couple in this morning that I was working with that are hugely successful, that started with virtually nothing. And they said, we're only where we are because of the friends that we have. They were far more driven than we were and successful. And we felt like we rode along on their coattails by getting the advice from them. So that's something else they should be doing. And if you're using an accountant or something like that, one of the little bits of advice, and this was my wife's advice, is consider not using mates. Like, use the best person to do the job for you, because it's very hard to sack a mate when you've outgrown them or if they're not doing their job. I see that all the time. Yeah.
That is a big one. I know so much in life you're supposed to be supporting your friends in business and stuff, but sometimes supporting your friends in business sometimes means not getting the best person for the job. And it's important to note.
It is, yeah. And above all, as I said before, is that the best piece of advice is build your asset base, so your equity. So whether that be cattle numbers, keep building those cattle numbers as much as you possibly can, or buying an asset like a block of land, an investment property, a house, whatever, and pay that thing down as quick as you can to build that equity and your cash flow. So a lot of people fall into the mistake of going, oh, well, I'm just breaking even, making enough money. Really focus on understanding profit, what it looks like, and building that up. And I think that's really, really important.
Ben, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to wrap up all the episodes. Have you done any schools that you'd recommend for the next generation to attend, whether it's schools or workshops that you got a lot out of?
No, I haven't, mate. And I thought about this a lot because I get asked this question by a lot of people, like, what school or what course could I do to improve my knowledge? And I don't know any, but I went back through my mind and thought, well, what were the key bits of education that I got early on that had a big impact on me? And the first one is Think and Grow Rich, the book. I don't know if you've come across it before. That's a game changer. Read that book, read it again, and read it 100 times. Like, set the alarm on your phone, do it every 6 months, like around manifesting goals and the network you deal with. If I can give anyone, I'd dump everything else and I just go straight into that straight away.
I think reading's probably one of the most underrated things that I know a lot of people do talk about it and they all go to that, but go to schools or something like that they talk about. But reading, the power of reading and reading the right books, it's underestimated, I reckon. It's some great books out there.
But I really struggle with reading, and I'm very auditory, hence why I've started a podcast. Surprise, surprise. But if you can't read, go get the audio book, put it on your phone. You're driving down the road, you're sitting in the tractor, you're mustering cattle, and just listen to it. Your subconscious will hear and remember it far better if you can't find the time to sit down with a book and read it.
Ben, have you had any mentors along your journey that have played a large part?
Yeah, definitely. They're very hard to find. It's very hard to find people that want to fulfill that mentor role for young people. And there's various reasons for that. And I've had a couple of mentors in my life that I've, begged, borrowed, or stealed to get them to do it. And it's been a real reward. But I think if you can't get a mentor, this is what I've done, and I was thinking about this last night, is what I'd suggest people do is think about someone that you would like to model. So someone in this world that you look at and go, geez, I wish I was a bit more like them. And you'll never find someone that has everything that you want. So you won't find someone that goes, wow, they're really good in business, but they're a bloody good father or mother, in that organization. You're always going to find blends. So what I try and do is get 4 or 5 different people that I really admire and trust. And then when I'm strategically thinking, or I'm making decisions, or I'm trying to work out where I want to go, is I'll say, for example, if Sam Fryer was my mentor, I'd say, what would Sam do? How would Sam think about this? And that's really, really been value to me over the years. But if you do manage to strike a mentor, the advice I'd give someone is it's a thankless job for mentors, mentoring younger people quite often. And the reason is quite often people don't listen. So if you're lucky enough to get a bloody good mentor, number one is if they give you advice or they recommend things, do something about it. Don't listen and don't take any action. That'll piss a mentor off quick as sticks. Even if you don't go ahead and do it, or you do it slightly different, give them some feedback and say, hey, if Sam was my mentor and Sam said, Ben, I've been listening to your problems and I think you should do X, Y, Z. what I'd always do is I'd go away, say, thanks, Sam. And then a week later, a month later, 2 months later, I'd send a little message on to Sam saying, hey, Sam, you recommended I go buy XYZ. I've bought it. Here's a photo of it. Thanks very much. That then turns a relationship with a mentor from this takes up my time, effort, and energy to like, wow, I've actually made a difference in that young person's life.
That's a big one, Ben. I've been lucky enough to be involved in mentor programs and being a mentee and a mentor in several ones. And that's a huge one, that to actually show that you're paying attention to that person and some of the stuff they're giving you and the time they're giving up is really beneficial to them to continue putting in the effort with you. So that's definite one that I reckon everyone should do, and show that they are listening to what people are saying. And
and there's another important point. Just sorry, Sam, to belabor this point, but I did manage to get a very good mentor when I was a financial advisor, and I chased him for a long time, and he said no, 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 and eventually he reluctantly said yes, and we've become very good friends now. And it got to the stage after about 7 or 8 years where we went out and had lunch one day, and he looked at me. And I'm not saying this from an ego point of view. He's the reason I did it. He looked at me one day. He says, you know what, Ben? He says, I've actually learnt as much from you as you've learnt from me. And the reason is because I said to him when I started, I said, I will do what you tell me to do. If it makes sense, I will give you feedback, and I'll bust my guts to try and add value back to you. So every time I'd have an interaction with him, I'd think, like, his name was David. How the hell can I make David's life better? And it became a beautiful experience for both of us, and we're now great mates. And I was able to help him as much as he helped me eventually.
Ben, just to wrap up, what would be your one piece of advice for someone starting out on their land journey?
Look, one of the things that I bang on about is vision. Like, actually take the time to sit down and work out what the bloody hell you want out of your life. Where do you want to go? How do you want to go about it? Life is difficult, and you'll hit a lot of roadblocks. And if you know where you're going, it's going to be so much easier. And most people don't spend the time. And if you do work that out, write it bloody down. Write it down, put it somewhere, and look at it regularly. That's the number one thing. If you want 1,000 breeders, or you want to own 200 acres or 10,000 acres, write that down, by when and how you're going to do it. That's the first step, so that then you're committed to doing it. And the second one, which may not work for some people, but one factor which I bang on about all the time, Sam, and I get myself into a little bit of strife, so you might have to edit this out, is your choice of spouse will make or break you. If you're on a journey and you're going on this journey and you're young enough and you aren't in a relationship, or you haven't hitched your wagon to anyone yet, is work out what the bloody hell you want from your life, and then find someone else that has the same vision. Every family that I've ever worked with in this game that has done things and had a great success, had a great journey and enjoyed it and had a great time with their family, everyone was on the same page. So if you're in that position of not being hitched up, choose your partner carefully.
So good relationship advice from the financial bloke. I like that.
well, my nieces and nephews who are 18, 16, 14, and 12. And every time I see them, I said, what's Uncle Benny's number one piece of advice? And they roll their eyes and they go, Uncle Benny, your choice of spouse will make or break you. And I said, that's my number one piece of advice for you young people.
It's 100% true. And I'm lucky enough, I think, while I'm recording here, I hear Emily at the back wrestling the kids. And it's pretty incredible if you don't have that rowing buddy in your corner and helping you out on this journey. It can be bloody difficult. And I 100% agree with what you're saying there, Ben, and it's 100% true.
Well, I'm too scared to say I don't have. No, my businesses have both been successful, and off the bat of Sarah, my wife. Without her, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have been anywhere near where I got to.
Look, Ben, thank you very much for jumping on the Place to Call Home podcast. This has been a great chat, and there's so many nuggets of gold in there that I definitely going to draw out and use and reflect on. But hopefully we'll keep you teed up for another chat in the future, and hopefully we might pick out some topics that listeners might want to deep dive into and get you back on. So appreciate your time and thank you very much.
No, my pleasure, Sam. As I said, I love what you're doing. More than happy to help out whenever I can. And yeah, good luck with the podcast, mate. I'll support it as much as I possibly can.
Thank you, Ben. Hey everyone, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was an absolute cracker. And if you did, be sure to share it with some friends and family. It's the best way to get the word out there. Also, if you got a minute, be sure to click the follow button on all your podcast players. It really helps the algorithm and helps other people find us. So if you can do those two things, that would be amazing. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with a quote, and it comes from Paulo Coelho. And I've definitely mispronounced his name. But anyway, it goes, "One day you will wake up and there won't be any more time to do the things you've always wanted. Do it now." Have a good day. Cheers.
Well, I just want to say a big thanks to Sam for having me on. He's got a great podcast, and for any of you who haven't checked it out already, it's A Place to Call Home. I'd highly recommend it. Now, if you enjoyed the episode, it would be awesome if you'd share it with your family and friends. And that's it for today. I'll see you next time for more Wealth and Wisdom.